So in this presentation, I'm going to explain how a bad actor or a hacker can bypass your Microsoft 365 multi-factor authentication MFA. So essentially how a bad actor can bypass MFA even though you have it enabled, even though you're getting an authentication message on your phone or you're getting it via email or whichever way it works. This is how a bad actor can bypass using phishing emails. So to start with, we look at credentials. So it's a common attack method is for hackers or attackers to gain access using credentials or systems that allow this access. So how did you do it? Well, phishing attacks account for 92% of all attacks. Malware is where malware gets installed on the machine, and in the background it's capturing usernames, passwords, etc. And then you have what's called credential stuffing. So this is using stolen usernames and passwords. These may come from websites that have been hacked. So for example, if you have a particular account with an online shop or whatever, and that particular account gets hacked and you've used that username and password in more than one place, which unfortunately a lot of people do, that username and that password or that email address and password is now out in the public domain where the hackers have access to it. And of course there is lists of common passwords that are used, and not a lot of people will use common passwords. And this is what we're talking about when we're talking about credential stuffing. So using stolen passwords, using usernames or email addresses and associated passwords. And then of course you've got common passwords. And it comes then down to the reusing of passwords. So this is previously used passwords that are in the public domain. And then finally, you have man-in-the-middle attacks where they actually capture the information. Maybe you're in a hotel and you log onto the Wi-Fi, but it's not the actual hotel's Wi-Fi. It's someone who's spoofing the Wi-Fi, and what they're doing is they're routing your emails or your information through their laptop or their device. They may ask you to input a username and password to gain access, hence they're grabbing that information. They may be simply sniffing the information out and hoping that it's not encrypted and they'll be able to get access to it. So the key here is keep your credentials secure and safe. Now, as I said earlier, this is multi-factor authentication, and multi-factor authentication has three parts really. It's got your user credentials, which is your username. It's got your password, which is the second part to it, and third then is that MFA, that multi-factor authentication. As I say, it could be code or whatever. So moving on then to the challenges. So the first thing is email is not secure. So if you are using email for MFA, it is not secure. Email is the most attacked technology out there. As I said, 92% of phishing attacks or cyber attacks start from a phishing attack, which is email. MFA on its own is not enough. Now, what we mean by that is, so you're going to have your multi-factor authentication, and later on we're going to look at how we can add additional layers of security onto MFA, multi-factor authentication, how we can actually add those layers of protection in place. And cybersecurity is about building layers and making it more difficult for hackers to get in. So we will be looking at that. Unfortunately, users click links, and the big question then is how do we weed out the good and the bad emails? So these are the main challenges that we're going to have to look at. So hacking Microsoft 365. So I suppose it starts with reconnaissance. So they're going to gather information. They're going to pick their targets. You know, it could be the chief executive officer, the CEO. It could be a new starter in an organization. They could be going on to business, social networking websites and grabbing information, like when people have said they've started a new job or they've got a promotion, just where there might be that little bit of a gap in knowledge in that. Then they'll move to scanning the environment. So they've picked their targets, they've picked the people they want to attack through the reconnaissance. Then they look at the environment, and what they're doing there is they're going to scan the domains. They're going to scan any social media accounts that organization may have. They're going to look at the wider organization. They're going to look for passwords that have been used in breaches by staff within that organization. So they're scanning the environment to see what you have. They're also looking at the technology, what firewalls you might have, what servers you might have, what servers you might have out in the public domain, even though they're in a, um, a protected area on your network. They're going to look at those servers and see if there's a gap in them, are they being patched, etc. And they're going to harvest as much information as they can, primarily from social media sites. And of course, we're looking at now the newer tools that we have, such as AI. AI can pull all that information together in minutes. So what took weeks before now is done literally in minutes. Then we move on to the phishing part. So the phishing email is sent to the target. So that phishing email, it's got a link in it. The victim clicks on the link, right? The link will look valid. So you hover the mouse over it, it actually looks valid. It starts off with what looks like www.microsoft.com, variable session, blah, blah, blah. And it'll go on then at the end. And the end will have another dot, and it'll have something like dodgywebsite.com or dodgy proxyserver.com, wherever it's going to, but it's a final part of that URL that really makes the difference in where it's going. The Microsoft bit at the beginning is only it's only a sub, and possibly could be 10 there, Steve, of subdomains. So you've got Microsoft.com dot something dot something dot something dot something dot something dot dodgy.com, and that dodgy.com is the piece you need to look at. So identifying email addresses and profiling targets, that's really what they're going to do. And when they've done that, as I said earlier, they scan the corporate environment. They've now done the phishing email. They've designed the phishing email so it looks valid, usually starting with something like Microsoft.com. The link may include what looks like session information to mask contents. The link may be very long, so if it's really, really long, look at the very end of the link. The final part of the link, or the final part of the domain, is the route to a proxy server that they're using. So the user is presented with what looks like a Microsoft page. This is after they click on the link. It takes them to a proxy server, and on that proxy server there's what looks like a Microsoft page. The user enters their credentials, which are captured and forwarded on to Microsoft itself. So what happens then is Microsoft gets a username, it gets a password, so those credentials are accepted because they are valid. The MFA, the Microsoft challenge, is sent to the victim. It's sent to the user. Again, everything looks fine. The user accepts the MFA, and the user is then logged in. So they enter the MFA in, and the user gets logged in. Now what happens is the proxy server is capturing the cookie and the session information. So what's important here is the cookie and that session information that it's capturing. The user knows nothing about what's happened. Everything seems fine. The user has no way of knowing they've really been phished. The attacker now has captured the username, the password, and then adds an MFA device. So the username password has been captured and the MFA has been done. So the attacker now has got access to the Microsoft server. The attacker will then attempt to add a new device, a new MFA device, which is allowed. This allows the attacker to have persistent access to the account. Now they're in, they've got access, they've got their own MFA. So when they attempt to go in, they actually are getting the authentication codes. They've changed the phone number in the background. They've pointed to a new device. So now the user is totally unaware because the user won't see the new MFAs. The victim's files are then downloaded, so the victim's files are stolen, so sensitive information is potentially released. Now, I suppose the next step is protection. So how do we protect against this type of attack? And this is the interesting part of this. So we spoke a bit earlier about layers of security, and this is where we look at those layers. So we use Microsoft conditional access to manage access to your information. So as part of this, we only allow trusted devices, only allow laptops and phones that are trusted. So primarily there, if you've got a domain, you might say conditional access, and you might have a rule in there that only the main joined devices can actually log onto the system. Now, if a hacker tries to get in and his device is not domain joined, which it probably won't be, he's going to get denied access. So that's the first thing. Then identify trusted locations and lock down untrusted locations. So look at where your teams are logging in from. And if your teams are logging in from, let's just say USA or Europe, you lock down everywhere else. You lock down Russia, you lock down India, you lock down China, etc. If you don't have people logging in from these places, you lock them down. Now, keep in mind that, again, all they're doing here is making it more difficult for the hacker because they can use VPNs to sort of route around it, but it's another layer of protection. So locking down is really, really important to lock down as many locations as you can. And I suppose the fourth thing to really do here is to look at the session timeouts. So protect your cloud applications, protect your endpoints with up-to-date antivirus and network monitoring, but ensure that sessions time out. So when someone is connecting, the session itself only lasts for X number of days or a week or whatever works for your organization. As I say, you just make sure that timing out as much as you can. And then, as I said earlier, the additional protections, ensure you have antivirus software in your machines and it's up to date. It's updating every single day, and ensure you've got some level of network monitoring in place. And protect data in other applications such as Salesforce, HR applications, payroll applications, etc. They're all vectors for hackers to get in and target your organization. So next one is data protection. So how do we protect our data? Well, we need to ensure that all data access is what we do. We use role-based access controls. And what this means is only giving staff members access to applications that they need. And even within the application, only give them access to the data within the application they need. So don't give them access. If someone in payroll who does not do, let's just say, contractor information or doesn't do contract payrolls or contractor payments, then don't give them access to it. If you have someone in finance who does all the invoicing, they get access to invoice only, but not payroll. So again, there is more work involved in locking these down, but you lock them down where you're only giving people purely access to what they need. And also consider shared responsibilities. And what I mean by shared responsibilities is where you have a system in place where it takes two people maybe to authorize the payment or whatever. One of the big ones out there is phishing and looking for an email from the CEO. Will you please pay this urgently? We need to get this paid as urgent as possible. It appears to come from the CEO, but it doesn't. Then someone goes along and pays that out. Have a system in place where you've got double validation or a secondary validation on payments and that, so that money is not going out there. And then moving on, we look at advanced threat protection. So we spoke about providing authorized staff with secure access to business data and applications and only what they need. Then you've got defend against sophisticated cyber threats, including phishing, ransomware, and data loss. So what you're looking at here, primarily phishing and ransomware and data loss, is around staff training. You might have the technology in place, you might have the firewalls in place, you might have email filters in place, but the next part here is training your staff. Staff training is the final link in the vulnerability area or in the gap in security. So ensure your staff get regular training. I'd suggest once a month. Instead of just doing the basic, video training, put a campaign in place. Video training, awareness campaigns for staff, internal training, posters, etc. And knowledge and news sharing is really, really important here. So talk about and make staff aware of recent cyber attacks, etc. And then finally, you've got device management. So to manage your devices and secure your Windows, your Mac OS, your Android devices, that all connect to your data. So what we're really talking about here when it comes to network security is three parts to it. You've got your hardware, firewalls, servers, etc., securing all them. Secondly, then you've got your software, keeping all your software up to date, your operating systems and any applications you're running. And then the final piece of that is actually people. So they're your three elements that you're looking to keep up to date. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this, and please subscribe to this presentations. I will be doing more, and thank you.